All right, 3, 2, 1. Joining me on this week's episode of the Wisconsin Sportsman podcast, I have founder, owner, and head guide, right, of Tight Lines Fly Fishing, Tim Landwehr. Tim, how are we doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Pierce. I'm doing great, man. It's great to be here, brother.
I'm happy to have you, dude. Did I get the title right? If not, we can
Yeah, I
rewind
mean,
that.
head guide, I've been guiding probably the longest or equally as long, but man, I think all of the guides that are working for me, I'm just going to qualify them all as head guides because,
I like that.
they're all equally skilled. They're very skilled.
Heck yeah. I like that. Yeah, you've got a very good fishy group up there in your neck of the woods, chasing smallmouth and putting them on them. I like it, dude.
Yeah, it's an incredible group of guys. I know that you've met a number of them, but that's the one thing, as we kind of get into this that I'm the most proud of is the fishy factor of the group. You fish with different people and you get to know different people, but sometimes you just wish those guys where it's like, man, some of these guys got that special something. You know what I mean? And these guys do.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, man. And I'm gonna give you some big kudos off the bat here. I mean, even I think one of the first or second times you and I met when I popped into the shop, talking with some of your current guides and even talking with you take damn good care of those guys. And I mean, that alone, I think, is something on top of just being outstanding guides, like you being an outstanding, just taking care of those guys is something you should definitely pat yourself on the back for, I think, because
I appreciate that, man. It's such a unique situation that we have, because these guys all live together in the summer. It's not like a normal guide operation where if you guide out west at night, you would just go home at night, sleep in your own bed, have your own dinner. These guys all live together for 3, 4, 5 months at a crack, and they all become best friends. So you gotta all get along, and you gotta take care of each other because it's just how it works. And it's a team, it's one of those things that there's not a competitive nature. Maybe I think anywhere there's a little competitive nature, but as a whole, when we hire on a new guide, our guides share, they'll give you the keys to the city, this is what you do, this is where you go. So pretty proud of all of them for that.
Heck yeah, that's awesome, man. And I mean, you guys have, without a doubt, one of the most unique lodging situations up there that I've ever seen. Can you just shed a little bit of light for folks who don't know? We don't need to give away the spot, but
sure,
dude, yeah. It's one of the coolest little spots I've ever, been able to call fish camp for 2 nights.
It is pretty perfect, Pierce. When we started it was not quite that elaborate. We started out and we were sleeping in tents. It was just terrible. Then we had a little 14-foot camper that we slept in, 4 dudes and 5 dogs, or 4 dudes and 3 dogs in a 14-foot camper. That was terrible. But now it's a really cool arrangement because we rent out an old ranger station, northeast Wisconsin. And it was an old DNR station that had been kind of transformed into what they were going to hopefully use as a B&B or an Airbnb or something. And we just decided to rent it. But it's perfect because it's got a couple apartments. All the guides live there, downstairs in the basement, the staging areas. And, we can have all of our boats, rafts, jet boats, and everything there. And, you've seen it, the basement, there's ping pong table, foosball table, cooler of beers. It is pretty much a perfect guide camp, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, couldn't ask for anything better. So before we get ahead of ourselves here, so you guys, the Tight Lines shop HQ is up in De Pere, Wisconsin, on your way up to Green Bay there. And you guys, I'm sure folks listening, if you haven't watched, what was it, season 2 of Das Boat? Heard of, just let me put it this way. If you're familiar with good smallmouth fishing, you've heard of Tight Lines Fly Fishing Company. Let's put it that way.
Very
you guys guide up in the northeast part of the state here for just gigantic smallmouth. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started? Let's start with you here. Where are you from originally, and how did you get really into fly fishing and eventually starting Tight Lines?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up here in De Pere, Wisconsin, which I still live in De Pere here. But, I've probably just like you and a bunch of your listeners, young guys that are just avid anglers or hunters where you just kind of go all in on anything. it's kind of what I did, and I quit a kind of a regular job and just moved out west and spent some time in Big Sky, Montana, and I guided out there, and that's where I met my wife. And we moved back here. She finished her undergrad, and we took every penny we had and just said, maybe we open this fly shop up. And that's what happened 24 years ago. So, I looked at out west, and out west is awesome. And those are your listeners that fish out west. I mean, it's a stupendous fishery, but it's loved a lot right now. I mean, like those rivers out west are getting hit pretty hard. And you look what we have here in the Midwest, and we just don't have the boat traffic. We've got these wild native fish, smallmouth bass that are wild native. We have this incredible fishery. And that's why I decided to open our operation up here. It was like, let's try to turn people on to smallmouth bass. And that was a long time ago when it was not quite what it is now. It did not have that same traction when we started.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I basically threw everything at it with a hope and a prayer, and like, here I am. It's still open. I mean, I guess that's a success story. It's still here.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you grow up fishing for smallies up in that area?
Yeah,
As a
we
kid?
did, but like I'll be totally honest, like trout bum, like I'm a trout bum, like just like a bunch of our buddies. That's you live and breathe trout,
Hmm.
and we always fished smallmouth, and we started fishing them with a fly. I'm like, oh my god, they fight so much harder than any trout do by like a long shot. But Bart and I had this conversation, and even Nate and some of our other guides had this conversation where I actually felt it took me a long time, even into owning the shop, to tell people like my favorite fish. I'm not a trout bum. My favorite fish is a smallmouth bass. I felt this like, I don't know. I felt like I was like cheating on trout fishing by simply saying that. But like, no, smallmouth are my absolute favorite fish that swim. That's just what it is. Still love
Yeah.
everything else, but smallmouth is it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, and I mean, I've heard stories from some of our mutual friends, and you on other podcasts and everything about those early days of finally coming out as a smallmouth angler, in public, like at shows and at
Yeah,
booths and stuff
yeah.
like that, and people looking at you like, "What on earth? Like,
Oh yeah.
why would you target smallmouth and stuff like that?" So, kind of like let's start with what did those first few years look like in terms of like getting people to take smallmouth seriously and like booking those first trips, as a
Yeah.
smallmouth guide.
That's a great question, man. The first couple of years were more of like just talking people into it.
Hmm.
That's really what it was. Because even though we opened the fly shop, I'd say 95% of our customer base was trout guys. I mean, it's a fly fishing store. So I think the turning point for us was like drift boats.
Yeah.
That was kind of the key. And I've mentioned this in a couple other podcasts where like the drift boats made smallmouth fishing in the Midwest okay and cool enough to give it a shot. Does that make sense?
Hell
I
yeah.
mean,
Totally.
when somebody hears about bass fishing, it might be that bass boat, glitter boat, or something, that they're thinking in their head. They're not
Hmm.
thinking what you and I know smallmouth bass fishing is like beautiful northern rivers, just amazing scenery. So I think the drift boat gave us that step in the door. Like, you should try this. It's like a Western float trip, and that's what opened the door. And I'm one of the Hyde uh, Midwest, or I'm their Midwest professional here. And I remember Bart and I bought the first two Hyde drift boats that were sold in the state of Wisconsin, and we bought
Huh.
them. And they had told us that if it didn't work out, we could always sell them in Michigan. I mean, it was one of those things. That's how much faith people had in this program. So like fast
Yeah.
forward, we got a handful of people to get out there and try it. And here you are going down this river, and you have the opportunity to fish top water, and having these big fish come up, eat a top water bug, and absolutely destroy them. And here we're fishing with 7 and 8 weights, and they're trout fishing with 4 and 5s, and having them just blown
Hmm.
away. And then on top of that, you have to look at like the respect of what it is. Like, a smallmouth bass is as native to us as the brook trout is.
Right.
This is their home range. So like every one of these fish that we're catching are a native wild species where we're fishing them here. So I mean, what's there not to like? It's incredible, and you have the chance at like the biggest smallmouth you ever catch on a fly anywhere in the upper Midwest. So
Yeah.
it was word of mouth after that. You know, some of these guys that we had that conversation when the hard talk 24 years ago, I'm still floating those guys down the river. Some of them are in their 80s now. So it worked.
Yeah, totally, dude. That's super cool. And I mean, just what an honor and just cool experience to be guiding the same guys for that long, right?
It's,
Have some of those OG clients who have held on for that long.
I'm
And just
goosebumped
love it.
up with you talking about that because I've got earlier this season we went to, I believe it was Fox Valley Trout Unlimited. I did a show called Trout Fest. No, it was Cabin Fever. And we have this group from Madison that's been fishing with both Bart and I. This is their 25th year. Like they've fished with us for 25 years, and they come over and they fish with us maybe 4 or 5 times a summer for 2 or 3 days. And these guys have gotten to be like they're like family. They're like family. And here I am at Cabin Fever. This is like a 2.5-hour drive for them. And I look at the entrance, and here comes all of these OG smallmouth guys from Madison just to come and see us. They're so excited for the season. And I think about the relationships and the friendships that I've made through the guiding component of this. I mean, it's the smallmouth bass and the river and the sport that binds us, but it makes me very emotional thinking about what else I've gotten out of this. You know, like, whew, these are my people. Every summer when they get in my boat, I can't wait for them to come because it's like, you know, old family day.
Yeah.
It's cool.
That's super cool, man. And I mean, that's from talking with guys who have fished with you, talking with some of your guides and everything. Like, I think that's part of, even from my experience and everything, being up there with you guys, and, you know, even early season before everyone was up there and everything like that. There's something, I don't know, like tangible about the feeling of being up north and, you know, fishing together and having that camaraderie and stuff like that. And I mean, you see it, you know, on all the videos and stuff with, you know, that you guys are putting out and everything. It's like guys sitting in the drift boats after a day of fishing, you know, drinking beers and hanging out and playing guitar and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's a secret sauce. And I think how fortunate I've been, just because I look at, like, in an industry full of industry professionals and people who are kind of big deals to you and I in our world of fly fishing, I think how lucky I have been to have had these guys find their way up to us. Cause, like, man, we've had Lefty Cray fish with us for years. Dave Whitlock, Dave and Emily had fished with us for years before Dave passed. They became great friends. You know, Flip Pallet's been up there fishing with us. Like, it's like,
right.
And every one of them's like, how does this slip through the cracks? Where are the people? What's going on? We're in the now right now. You know, like, the smallmouth angler is in the now. Like, this is the heyday, you know, Is it going to run out where we're going to be like, damn, do you remember when it was so good before all these guys were here? Like, that scares me.
Yeah. No, definitely, dude. I think that's one of the coolest things about it, though, is, like you said, it's a progressing heyday that we're in right now with the, you know, advancements in technology, the advancements in, you know, fly lines, flies, you know, patterns, different tactics and stuff like that. And just, I mean, information out there. Like, I never really thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. Like, this is the heyday of, especially a smallmouth warm water fly fishing launch. Really,
this is the revolution. It's happened in the last 10 years, and you hit the nail on the head. You look at, I think about all the guys that influenced me in the smallmouth world. Obviously, Whitlock more than anybody, because he was a very close personal friend, but biggest influence on me, unquestionably. But I mean, the old books of, like, Harry Murray, and even Midwest legends who's passed away, like Tim Holschlag, you know, some of these guys. Like, there was so much stuff on Bob Clauser, but it was in its infancy. I don't want to take anything away from any of them, but it was still kind of trout centric in the way that we'd fish smallmouth. And now I look at like, guys like Blaine and, like different fly patterns, the revolution of what's happening, the wiggly bite, finesse fishing. It's going real fast. We're learning real fast, and we're learning that there's a lot more to smallmouth than what we thought 20 years ago. The rabbit hole's way deeper now.
Mm-hmm. Right, 100%. When you say that some of those previous guys were more trout centric, how do you mean? Just the technology available to them, the types of flies, the tactics. What do you think it was?
I think what it was, if we look at, well, Whitlock was different because Whitlock is an artist. Like Whitlock's flies were an art form. So like, and Larry Dahlberg, Dahlberg diver heads, these revolutionized fly patterns as we know it. But when I do look at and I do mean trout centric, what we used to do in the smallmouth world was we would take trout patterns like woolly buggers, variations, and different things, and we would try to jam that into the smallmouth world, like a smallmouth was a trout, because that's what was available. We didn't have guys that were pushing the envelope with bigger bait fish patterns, the development of like game changers, and like I said, like Dahlberg style heads, hair heads, that sort of thing. Everything was like Hellgrammite nymphs, woolly buggers, or it was like a largemouth bass popper. It's there's been an acceleration in the minutia of the sport, and like that adds to the heyday. Like we've learned so much so fast, how smallmouth react, how they behave, and how our fly patterns work in comparison to trout fishing, because it is not a trout, and you cannot treat it like a trout, or you shouldn't treat it like a trout.
Right. That's interesting, man. That's fascinating. Because it makes me wonder too, kind of circling back to those early years a little bit. Like, did you start out guiding with more like trout centric patterns? Like start out like hucking big woolly buggers and
we were dumb
and stuff
we were
like
just dumb.
that. Just figuring it out.
We just followed the book, man. Like, and I remember. So I've talked about this on most podcasts, but I would say that it's probably one of the biggest things that's happened in smallmouth fishing that most people don't even know about. But like, this is how the big fly revolution came to be.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this a number of times, but 20 some years ago, if you were fishing like a woolly bugger, like a beadhead woolly bugger, maybe you'd be fishing like a size 2 for smallmouth, and that would be like the big streamer. That's what you would fish.
Yep.
Years ago, I remember Bart had come into the fly shop, and there was an old guy and his son in a little John boat. This is 23 years ago. Old guy in a John boat, and they were fishing big rapalas in the middle of the river, just ranking these raps. And he and his grandson were roping them. I mean, like, they were getting them. And Bart came into the shop, and they had a good day of fishing, but he came into the shop. He's like, Timmy, we got to find the biggest fly that we've got. This is 20 some years ago. So like, this was not part of the smallmouth world at that point. It was not. Didn't exist. This was before modern streamers for trophy trout with Kelly Gallup. This is way before any of that stuff came to be. And he found the Murdich minnow. And the Murdich minnow was a striper fly. You're nodding your head because you know exactly what that fly is.
Yep.
I mean, it was a striper fly, but it's big and flashy. It's considered an intermediate level fly for your audience. Was it 5 inches long, something like that? But it was way bigger than anything we fished. And I had some dusty ones in the fly box because it was used for stripers, and I had them in the shop. And for about 5 or 6 years, he and I would almost exclusively fish only that fly because we would just get them. And that was the turning point on the big fly phenomena. I mean, after that, like, Murdich minnow is like one of the number one selling smallmouth flies in the world, and it's because of Bart Landwehr. That's really what happened. That's the truth. That's it. I was there. I saw it happen.
Dude, that's the coolest story ever. I'm so glad you just segued into that like that. It was literally like, like 2 bullet points down, dude. That was all like that's the coolest story out there, in my opinion. I freaking love that.
So like all the guys talking about, Blaine is a buddy of mine, and like, he changed the game because that articulation style of fly is pretty next level magic. But when we jump into the big fly game for streamers, like, that was the starting point. That's where it all began. So it's undisputed fact. I saw.
Dude, it's so sick. It's so sick, man. Because yeah, you're right. Like you go to any warm water shop now, there's like 4, 5, 6, 10 bins of Murdich,
Yeah,
on their fly
different
desk. Like,
colors. Like
yeah,
yeah,
dude, and just
rattles
weird
in
stuff.
them.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. Dude, it's so cool. It's so sick, man. Because I mean,
But
that's
that's where we learned. We learned so much, Pierce, because like those were the days. Like Bart and I are now embarrassed. Like if you want to do a good podcast, you should get a few of our guides on sometime. A little round
Mhm.
table we could do. It'd be fun.
Hell yeah.
But Bart and I are embarrassed because like I can remember the Murdich had fished so well on fish that were not pressured at all. They never saw that fly, so they were really dumb to it. It
Hmm.
changes over time the more that that's fished. But could be July and August in a bright, sunny, calm day, and we would still fish double Murdiches all day. Like we wouldn't even fish poppers. Like
Yeah.
it was that ridiculous. And now
Huh.
like I just fish everything that floats. But I mean it was such a revelation at that time.
Totally, man. I love it. What were some of the like fly patterns that because I know some fly patterns have come out of your guys' shop as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Kind of pioneering smallmouth and stuff there. And
Yep.
like what are some of the ones that follow it after that big fly phenomenon kind of hit?
After the big fly phenomena, there was a fly that came out called the Bardo minnow. And the Bardo minnow was an angel hair head in a dubbing brush. Giant pain in the ass to tie because like stuff everywhere. It's kind of pre-made dubbing brushes.
Mhm.
But again, a variation off of that. Charlie's Evil Snowflake, Magic Brownie, which are still used today. Guys love those. Those are some
Yeah.
of my favorite intermediate patterns. Nabby's minnow, Nate's minnow. That's done in olive, white, black. All variations off of that bigger bait fish. And then the top water phenomena, the old Mr. Wiggly and some of the finesse stuff that the shop has kind of pioneered over the years, gotten real
Totally.
popular too.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Well, and I mean that on that note, you mentioned fishing things in kind of a trouty manner originally, and it's almost like you guys have kind of come full circle back to like how do we sort of because that was one of the first things you told me when I popped in last
yeah,
spring was like, isn't it cool? Because like it fishes
yeah,
kind of like a trouty river, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like it's a
yeah. It's
smallmouth
changed.
river that's like fishes very trouty and stuff. How did the introduction of like some of those smaller flies and the dries and the wiggly patterns and stuff like that come into play?
It's a really good question, Pierce, because I'll tell you what it is. It's one word: pressure.
Okay.
Fishing pressure. I always thought smallmouth, like the dumb factor of like it's just a smallmouth. It's kind
Hmm.
of like the blockhead of the playground. He's a bully, but he's not the brightest. Sharpest tool in the shed. But like
Hmm.
they are. And what we noticed with that minnow phenomena is whenever you get to a brand new fishery, and you and I might have had this conversation when you were in the shop. You get to a brand new fishery with gigantic bait fish, with under pressured fish. You're going to catch all of them, and you're going to catch
Yep.
all of them for a window of time. And then what's going to happen is you're going to get a bunch more followers, like non-committal follows, like, oh my God, he's still following it. You can kill it. You can stall it. You can get him to bite. But it just becomes progressively harder to get the
Hmm.
bite the more you poke those fish. And that's what we found with it. And that's where we found like the topwater game came in, where it was like, even with a boogle bug or with just a standard popper for your audience, like standard topwater popping bugs, they'll eat that. They'll come up and they'll eat that. And if it's sitting there slowly enough, a lot of times they'll eat that better than any of the bait fish patterns that we fish. And then we started to see as the water started getting lower and lower and got clearer and clearer, the poppers, they would even just sit underneath and watch. And that's where kind of that wiggly and that finesse game kind of came to be, where like we're coaxing some of these big fish, what we classify as passive feeders,
Hmm.
into eating by giving them an offering that is, it's not like a trout offering, but it's good enough for a
Yeah.
bass. And I think we've hit the ceiling um, of what they can comprehend, if that makes sense. Because we've been
Okay.
on this wiggly bite for years now, and they're not figuring it out.
Huh.
So, maybe we've plateaued. Maybe it's like, all right, those trout on those, tailwaters will still eat midge, and maybe maybe that's what's happened with us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it's
Interesting,
come
man.
full circle. That's what we've seen.
That's fascinating, man. I thought you
Mm-hmm.
were going to take that another direction and say that they're starting to get wise to that as well. And I was like, well, what's next then?
I don't know. Like, I'm afraid, man. I'm afraid what's next, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the next level in the smallmouth game is kind of getting outside the box instead of just throwing big meat and stuff, which is tons of fun, but truly headhunting some of those passive feeding fish.
Yeah.
We're sight feeding some of these on weed lines and flats where in the summer months you can see them cruising and
Mm-hmm.
trying to get those fish to eat, because it's really a rewarding game. You know, it's great to blind fish them, but man, when you can sight fish a 5 pounder that's just cruising on a flat and have him come up and sip in a wiggly like a damsel or a dragonfly wiggly,
Mm-hmm.
that is, man, I've sat down high-fived and had guys like wind their stuff in and be like, let's go. That's it. That doesn't get cooler than that. So
That's fantastic,
it's
man. And
full
that,
circle.
dude, that's rad. And that, like, it's so cool too, figuring out the stuff of, it's almost, going to my trout brain here. It's like, I picture the wiggly offering as like that bug that stuck, that emerger that got stuck in the film, that
Yeah.
it's too good of it's
Yeah.
too easy of calories to pass up,
That's
right?
it.
And so they'd be stupid to do. Like,
It almost feels like you can feel them thinking that, because I've had some of those bass like come up and here's their pectoral fins like, and they're like almost bouncing that bug off of their nose like a seal with a ball on its nose, and like, do I, and then like the white of the mouth opens. It's like, oh, so good, so good.
it's so sick, man. I love that.
Yeah, it's the
Where did
best.
the where, or I guess when did the damsel nymphs come into play? 'Cause that
The
was something
damsel
that
nymphs.
I was like never
Were,
even thought of those.
were you up there during that time?
I
Were
was
you
a week
fishing?
early,
Okay.
but I brought some.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's something we've shot some videos on too. That was kind of one of those things that we stumbled on, and I'm sure it happens on all watersheds. So everything that we are going to talk about in this podcast obviously is related to northeastern Wisconsin
Hmm.
watersheds. That's what I'm familiar with. So I'm sure a lot of this changes from river to river, etc. Um, but what we've found is typically at the end of May, we see this gigantic migration of dragonflies. And, they'll push towards that shoreline. They'll migrate to the shore. Nymphal shucks, break out and become an adult dragonfly. Not the
Yep.
damsels, but the dragonflies themselves. But I mean, the nymph it's a good sized bug. It's like maybe an inch and a half nymph. And we'll see them at the boat ramps. And when you start to see them like actually on the shorelines and the grasses, they're available to those smallmouth. So we'll fish like a popper dropper scenario, like we'll have a popping
Hmm.
bug right to a 8 or a 9 foot bass leader. And then down below that, a piece of maybe 10-pound fluoro, maybe 14 or 16 inches. And then Charlie Pate, one of the guys that guided for us for years and years, it was our store manager for a long time, has a dragon dropper nymph that he does that we sell at the shop. And that just gets down below that. So you use that popper as a strike indicator, and man, when that's on, like it's like 8, maybe 9-1 or 8-2 dragonfly to popper.
Really?
They're looking for that thing. It's pretty
Huh.
cool, but it's a couple week window, but it's really neat.
That's super cool, man. I love that. Yeah, I was surprised when Stan and I were talking prior to me coming up last spring, and he was like, "Yeah, try and tie some of these." And I was like, "All right, sure, whatever." And just kind of grabbed whatever olive junk I had on my tying desk and everything, and
Perfect.
just whipped something up, sort of in that shape. And it was like,
That's perfect.
huh. I wish I would have gotten to actually, throw some of these things, but we did see some
Yeah.
eating. But I feel like I should have like asked this prior to us diving down the fly talk here. But
Yeah.
now that we've got our base of fly knowledge and our list of
Sure.
flies here, can you walk me through up in your neck of the woods there? What's kind of like a year look like from a smallmouth's perspective in terms
Sure.
of what are they doing?
Yeah.
Like it's March 13th or 17th right now. What are they doing now? What's it going to turn into? And how do you adapt
Right,
tactics
right.
to target those fish?
Yeah, how it works right now is like our fish right now are in wintering stage. The hard part about
Hmm.
some of the watersheds that we're fishing is most of that is coming out of very cold water from the UP and way up north. So we're dealing with a lot cooler temperatures. When you see guys start posting stuff in Michigan and PA and Ohio, their waters might be 15, 20 degrees warmer than what I'm dealing with,
Hmm.
seasonally in the early start. So typically we'll start to see what we call kind of our dispersion middle of April, depending on what the water temperatures are. What that basically means is those fish are falling out of like wintering holes and actually going into pre-spawn areas, like trickling throughout the watershed, because they'll all be stacked up in isolated places
Yeah,
early on. So we usually don't get started until we start seeing that water temperature. When it's like 40, you're going to start to see a bunch of dispersion, and like we can go and target a bunch of those fish in some of those areas. Then we get into the pre-spawn, and that pre-spawn, most of those fish will be dispersed, but most of those fish will be dispersed into warmer temperature spots, slower water currents, things like that, where they're going to start looking for places to spawn, make nests, and things like that. That's the time of the year that you can target some of the biggest smallmouth of the entire year, because a female might be another pound heavier just because of eggs, etc.
right.
So you're going to have an opportunity at some really big fish. Then they spawn. We try to leave them alone. You and I talked about that. Like we don't try to guide during the spawn. These are all wild, naturally reproducing fish, so we try to give them that break. And then by the time we get into the first part of June, most of them are spawned out. Most of the females have recovered enough to start the bite again. And then we crawl right into what we would kind of consider like the normal summer dispersion, meaning that these are where these fish are going to feed for the next 3 months. Some of them will be home bodies, but you can rely on all of that what you would expect smallmouth to be in those months.
For sure.
First part of May, June, that dragonfly thing, we start to see a lot more activity with damselflies showing up first part of July. But we'll start fishing top water sometimes middle of May already if the water temperature will allow. So you don't have to wait super long. But June, July, and August are kind of your core months for the natural dispersion. Then we get into September, still really good fishing. If we get really cold nights and stuff, things start to get kind of wonky because those fish will start to migrate and start thinking about winter's coming and start going into some of those spots. But September, October, and then into November, you can still target them and have really good success. Slower pools, slower moving water, float and fly techniques, kind of jigging stuff in deep pools.
Hmm.
But you can find big pods of fish. But that's kind of what our season looks like as a whole. Our meat and potatoes is May through
Got it.
mid-September. That's our guide season.
Hmm. For sure, man. I like it. Circling back
Mm-hmm.
to pre-spawn there, you mentioned they're moving up into those warmer areas. What are some examples of those warmer areas? Is it more like flats? Are you looking for like creek inlets or
Oh, good. Yeah.
near dams or anything? Like,
Well,
what
the
do you look for?
dams, the dams. This is an interesting story because a number of years ago, we had trained one of our guides, Drew, who had been with me for years. But it was his first time down the river with one of the guides, and it was Nate, myself, and Drew, and we were right below a dam, and we were fishing like jig style flies on floating lines, but deep mono leaders, and jigging
Dead flies.
these fit, yeah, yeah, and fishing these, and like we had like 12 fish in the boat over 17, like
Hmm.
in 40 minutes. Like he's like, oh my god, this is the best thing ever. We got down another 200 yards and we didn't touch another fish for 5 miles. And it was
Really?
because, yeah, all of those fish were still stacked up in that low, slow area and had not dispersed down. That's what had happened there. But when you're talking about what do you look for, when the dispersal starts, like sunnier sides of the river at that time are going to warm up fastest. So you're going to want to
For
look for
sure.
the sides that are exposed more to bright light, which doesn't seem normal, but it's going to increase water temperatures by 2 to 5 degrees on most days. Slower moving stuff, myriad of rock and wood in the bottom where it's good spawning cover, something that you would envision to be good spawning areas. That's what you're
Hmm.
going to look for. Slow breaks. The other thing, and you had mentioned it earlier, but I'll explain why it is creek mouths. Creek mouths can be good through the whole year, But creek mouths in the spring of the year are always better than any other time. And the reason being is most of the time, those creek mouths that are dumping into the river itself are a lot warmer than the water temperature of the river itself. The river temperature is getting all that snow melt and all of that cold water from way above. Those creeks that are coming in are usually far warmer, and those fish will sense that. And I've had spots where I did an anchor drop on a creek mouth and came up with a dozen plus fish just because of that temperature change.
No kidding.
So yeah,
That's fantastic, man. Another thing you mentioned too on, when we're talking about spawning and leaving those fish alone and everything, like you guys are guiding on a trophy smallmouth fishery where, you give out hats for 20-inch fish,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
How, for folks who don't know, how long does it take for a smallmouth to reach that size on average?
Yeah, and that changes in different areas and different fisheries.
Okay.
But like where we are in the North Woods, and especially with colder winters and colder climates, and we've worked with both the Wisconsin and Michigan DNR, and some of those fish that are a true taped 20 could be like 15 to 18 years old. I mean, it's a massively old fish, and it is cool to tell people that, because some of them that may kill and harvest fish would think twice on that, where it's like, man, maybe I should put that one back. So, and typically when you're starting to deal with fish that are over that 17-inch range, most of the time that's going to be a female, it's going to be a hen, and that's our brood stock. Let those fish go. Those are native fish. So
Totally.
yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
One random question, just because I'm curious. How do you tell the difference between a male and a female smallmouth? Is there like a shape of the face or anything?
No, it's not like a steel. Basically, I can't tell you like biologically. I mean, you can't really look at like its fish parts or something,
No,
but it's almost always, if you look at like the spawning situation where it's like you look at like a hen on a nest, and then you see like one of the bucks or one of the males around it, like the hens are always the big ones. I mean, it always just seems like when I'm looking at mature smallmouth, if it's over 17, it's a very high likelihood it's a female.
Got it.
So
Got it. Totally makes sense. I wasn't sure if there was any sort of like.
I wish I knew. Maybe I'm going to Google that when I get like. I should know this.
There we go. I like that, man. That's awesome, dude. So you also have, as a smallmouth pioneer that you are, your crew and a handful of other smallmouth experts from the Midwest wrote a phenomenal book specifically on fly fishing for smallmouth. It came out a number of years ago called Smallmouth, Modern Fly Fishing Methods, Tactics, and Techniques.
Yep.
I was flipping through this earlier today.
Yep.
And there was a section in there talking about the different levels of, basically the different shelves, in a river, and targeting fish on depending on the shelf. Walk me through kind of how do you figure out what shelf the fish are on a given day or given a different situation?
Yeah, well, we talk about that shelf because it is one of those things, like the rule of thumb for bass fishermen a lot of the time, and you'll hear it from people, is like, you have to hit the bank. If you're not right on the bank, you're not in the money. And that is true when there's enough water there. But as the summer progresses is when we're really changing those shelves, Pierce. Like early on in the season, there's plenty of water up in those shallow shelves, or what I would mean by the shoreline, to cover those fish's backs, offer the protection, and offer the food source for those fish to be comfortable up on those shelves. But then we start trickling into July and August, and the water starts dropping out. And that shelf that you were fishing might only be 4 inches deep. Right. And sometimes those fish will be up in there, yes, but you're wasting your time a lot of times on that. And that's where, like, when you were paging through that book, you saw like the second shelf. And what we refer to that second shelf is, there's always like the other main river channel that exists on every single watershed, where if you back off, you'll see where like there's like a break, and then there's another drop of rocks. And that's where we would focus on that, almost like you're fishing the bank. You would be fishing just that shelf, because those fish will use that deep to shallow protection area to be able to slip up there and feed, and then easily drop back off of it. So early season, when there's enough water, you can fish up tight. But when that water drops out, like a key to success, especially for people getting into the sport, is like back way out on that and look for that other drop and really focus on that.
Got it. Is it primarily just an amount of water available to them? I mean, you've got a tall
Yeah.
fish, and obviously it's not going to be comfortable in 4 inches of water and stuff. Does that change? Like, say you've got a foot of water on that top shelf
If you've
or
got
that third shelf or whatever.
if you've
Like,
got a foot of water, that's the experimentation stage right there, where
sure.
it's like there's a lot of times when there's like that margin between like, will these fish be up in this skinny
Hmm.
water? Will they feel comfortable? And that's where like I'll start my day out in the drift boat as like piloting a drift boat down, where I might stand up on my seat. I might look out there. Like sometimes you'll see wakes, you'll see movement of fish where it's like, okay, there's fish up here. Or, you give it a good quarter mile, a river with good anglers and give it your all. And if you don't get a bite, like get the hell off, pull back out, they're not there.
Sure.
So
Got
it's
it.
kind of
Makes
experiment. But
sense.
I have seen fish in like water this deep. So I mean you can't exclude that, but
Hmm.
I don't put the eggs in the basket that they're in that all the time.
Right, for sure. Does sun exposure have anything to do with that? Like, are they? Once again, my mind reverts to trout, and like they don't want to be under a spotlight, right? Like, are
It
they as concerned with
yeah,
that?
it is true, but I've also seen like I've got a couple different opinions on this, because I've got guys like, okay, always fish the shadier side of the bank, and
Hmm.
always fish the shadows, and I always do fish those shadows. I can't help but fish those shadows, especially as a trout angler. But man, smallmouth have so few predators in our river environments. I mean, like pike, muskie take such a few amount of them. Like eagles, we have a million eagles. I've never seen one eat a bass. I see them eat dead stuff all the time, but like they're not predated on
Hmm.
like that type of thing. So long story short, like I've caught a number of fish that were approaching 6 pounds in bright sun in knee deep water. So, you know,
Sure.
you don't have to I just fish the structure, the best structure you possibly can. And if the shadows and stuff come with it, then fish those along with it, but don't put your whole game plan into just shady sides, shady this, shady that.
For sure.
The
For
smallmouth are
sure.
on the move. The other thing too is like a largemouth bass is not a smallmouth. Largemouth bass sit in one spot, like under a dock, and then attack. Smallmouth are on the move almost all the time. They're swimming about looking for food. So they don't just hold usually.
Yeah, totally makes sense, man. Totally makes sense. That's interesting. Super interesting. You mentioned you love flies that float.
Yeah.
That is a very wide category of fly, especially in the warm water space and everything. I mean, you've got sliders, divers, frog patterns, poppers, wigglies, and stuff like that. How do you discern when to throw? This could be a huge rabbit hole and probably a podcast in itself, but I'm
It
gonna ask
is.
a big
Yeah.
question. Like, what is sort of your rule of thumbs versus, in terms of like, well, I think today's a popper day over a slider day or something like
Well, if
that.
you ask any of our senior guides that work for
Hmm.
me, every day is a popper day. Whether you like it or not, we're gonna fish on top. Um, and I'll tell you, like, I bet you I fish on top 80% of my season. Because I can get away with that. But you are
Right.
right. This is a rabbit hole, because like a standard booglebug popper. If you fished a standard booglebug popper in a variation of like two different sizes, the 4 and the 6, I mean, you could get away with those in a couple of color spectrums for your season for topwater. You legitimately could.
Hmm.
But to go down that rabbit hole shortly but sweetly, if the water is really high early season June and it's up into the grass, you can fish like divers, frog patterns. There's a ton of frogs, spring peepers at that time, and that's when you attack that kind of thing. That's when
Totally.
those frogs and diver patterns, you get the cool bites, aggressive eats, because they know those frogs are there. Top water and hair bugs and stuff that can make some noise are going to be super effective on that too. When that water drops out, that's when that wiggly game comes in. And that is my absolute, I think it's Bart's too. I think that's our favorite time of the year, because it's the trickiest, most technical, satisfying kind of way to catch a smallmouth, to me, to trick a big one on that kind of stuff. But that is a skinny water game. And I'm not boasting, but it does require a high degree of understanding of where you are on the water and exactly the type of water that you're fishing. And it's really
Hmm.
hard to describe it exactly. It's kind of a
Okay.
feeling. So,
Got it. Got it. The fishy stuff, the
yeah,
fishy water is what it, you just got to know
yeah,
what the fishy
yeah,
water is.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
I like it, man. So, dude, if you were to build out for folks listening here who think, you know what, I want to go start fishing up north for
yeah.
smallmouth, I want to start chasing this. What length and weight rod and what line?
Okay,
And I'll do leader length too. Would
okay,
you recommend for
yeah,
folks?
yeah. It's pretty simple. If somebody said I just want a bat, I'm going to give you two answers. Somebody said I just want a smallmouth bass rod, I would tell you a 9 foot 7 weight is my all time favorite. I sell more 9 foot 8 weights because of the versatility of an 8 weight for most anglers will do
Mm-hmm.
bonefish, everything in between. So if somebody's asking me like the particular rod, the 7 weight is my favorite. Um, as far as leaders, super simple. Doesn't have to be real technical. You can build them yourself, but I don't like knots. They catch weeds and stuff. I use a Rio 9 foot 10-pound bass leader, and I cut 2 feet of that off, and I replaced that with 8 or 10 pound Maxima chameleon. I know it sounds weird, but chameleon for your listeners is kind of an orange or a red mono, but our rivers are real tan and it blends in really good, and I just don't break fish off on it. It just works great. Um,
Interesting.
Lines is its own thing. I'm glad that you asked this question because fly lines are their own problem. You know, there's all these bass bug tapers that are available and different things. And most of the fly lines now that are designed for bass, if you have a 7 weight rod, for instance, Scientific Anglers makes a line called the bass bug.
Yep.
The bass bug is actually 2 full line weight sizes bigger than what it says on the box. So you
Mm-hmm.
buy a 7 weight, it really is a 9 weight. And everybody loves it because you could throw a kindergartner with it. I mean, like it'll cast everything, but you lose a fair amount of accuracy. You lose a lot of accuracy because it's more of a clumsical line. It's all real front heavy.
Yep.
So, but if somebody's asking for like a good all arounder that'll throw everything, like that will do it. One thing that we had Nate, myself, and Bart were involved with last year with Scientific Anglers is Brad Beefus had called us and he said, you guys fish all of these finesse flies. And I had done a podcast with Tom Rosenbauer with Orvis, and Tom asked me about the same question. And I said, well, first of all, our staff has some very accomplished casters, really good fly casters. And none of them like the real heavy, clunky stuff. They all like to stretch out 70 feet off the front of the boat, long casts, and aerialize a lot of line. And I told Brad Beefus, I said, what our guides are looking for is a warm water line. So we're going to look for either a mono core or a really stiff core that's going to hold up in this temperature. But I want it to be only maybe a half size bigger or just a smidge bigger. But I want the rear taper of that fly line to go considerably further back instead of just this big blocky head. So the rear taper extends a long way. And the reason for that is you can hold a pile of line in the air and
Yep.
it turns it into a precision casting rod. So it's going to make your boogle bugs, your top water flies, more tactical, with your casting. So I like both of those lines. And if I'm fishing more finesse stuff, I'm using the Scientific Anglers. I think it's called the Infinity Warm Water Smooth is what it is. And for the guys that are accomplished casters that are looking for that finesse, that's the line for that.
Hell yeah. Yeah,
So,
that is, dude, I fish the Infinity Cold
yeah,
for most of my trout
yeah,
stuff. And
yeah,
dude, it's such a bulletproof line for like literally anything you could want to do
yep,
with it. But yeah,
yeah,
gonna get in the
yeah.
warm. I've got a 7 weight warm Infinity sitting in the cart right now. That's
Good for the by now, by
Yep,
now. Well,
exactly.
I'm proud of that line because like, and I'm it is next level stuff, and it's pretty cool. A company like Scientific Anglers to actually listen up, and like Brad called me right after that podcast, like, what do we have to build? What do we build for you for this? So that's what
Hmm.
they made.
Absolutely, man. And I mean, it's so cool too, because I mean, SA is a Michigan company. You
Yeah.
guys are, just across the lake and
Yep.
everything. And, it's cool seeing how much innovation is coming out of the Midwest right now.
Yeah.
in that fly fishing space. As small as it is, like
It's heavy
it's
though.
it's exactly heavy hitting. It's pretty
Yeah,
freaking sweet, man.
it's pretty cool, Pierce, because like I'm just kind of looking at this after 25 years. I'm 52 now, and I'm like looking at like the evolution of like warm water fishing, and like I got to see it. Like I
Yeah.
physically got to watch a bunch of this happen. Like I watched it happen from like years ago, going to the Michigan show. My daughter was in a baby carrier. Like that was 20 years ago. I about got laughed out of that Warren, Michigan show because they're like smallmouth,
Hmm.
like yeah, they're awesome. And now you go to any one of these shows, and I would almost bet you there are more smallmouth outfitters in the Midwest at these shows than there are trout outfitters.
Yep.
So it's happened. It's a real thing now.
Yeah. 100%, man. 100%. I mean, I guess I take the opportunity to thank you for
Oh man.
being at the forefront of that and
No,
all that. Yeah, man.
I just got lucky. I like fishing them. I'm like, God, they fight hard. This is cool. We should do this.
Hell yeah. I love it, man. Dude, you kind of touched on it earlier, and I want to circle back to it a little bit without getting too nostalgic here.
Yeah.
But since we're on the note of it, you've had the opportunity to fish with some absolute legends and pioneers in the fly fishing space. I mean, you mentioned Whitlock, Lefty Cray, Flip Pallet coming up and fishing with you guys a bunch and stuff like that, as well as, multiple others. I'm curious, just how has time spent fishing with those guys influenced you as a guide, but also just as an individual?
Well, it's a really weird deal. It's a very surreal minute. Like it's kind of bizarre sitting in the middle of your boat, and here is like the guy that you look up to the most of your entire life. He's your Babe Ruth, and like you're guiding him down the river. So first of all, it's like a surreal minute. The other thing that's happened though that I will say is like every one of these guys, um, they're famous to us, but in the rest of the world space, they're not, which
Hmm.
makes them incredibly approachable and not assholes. I don't know how to like better describe. Like they're just good humans. Like if they were in an
Yeah.
airport carrying a fly rod tube, somebody would stop them. If they're at a Costco, like nobody's going to know it was Dave Whitlock or Joan Wolfe or Lefty Cray.
Hmm.
But like every single one of them that has been in the boat with me, the first thing is like they've wanted to help me however I could on my path, from promotion to whatever that they could do to help me. And I think that community in the fly fishing world, there's not a whole lot of spaces that could happen. It's like I'm for me, you for you, and like every one of these guys, like how can I help you either promote this or how can I make you a better angler? So that's just changed me enormously, and then that's also it's also changed me on my ethos. I'm like, how do I spread this, and how do our guides and the guys that I guide with such knowledge, like we got to keep spreading this down to the next guy. I mean, we got to keep passing this torch down, and but
Hmm.
it's been overwhelmingly cool getting to fish with those guys, and it has changed, my style of fishing, how we fish, fly development, and all of that, because those guys were next level.
That's awesome, man. That's super
Mm-hmm.
cool. How many are you guys seeing an increase in like young guys coming into the shop or getting trips with you guys and stuff?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I'll be honest. I think the fly fishing industry is all of the outdoor industry is kind of in trouble a little bit, just with youth recruitment, things like that, and
Mhm.
that's been a problem since I've started in this industry. But I will say, it seems like the muskie world and the smallmouth world has brought a younger culture into it. Have you
Yeah,
seen that kind of too? Like in fly tying and everything else, it just seems like there's a culture around it now, a younger culture.
definitely. Yeah,
So
100%. I think especially near more of those kind of urban areas and
yeah,
suburban areas where folks are familiar with the largemouth bass that's in,
yeah.
the river or in the pond, across the road or whatever it may be. I think, I don't know. That's a great question, man. I think I've
It,
seen that. Just as I went
I
to
think
school
you
up,
have.
west of Chicago and stuff like that, and in the
Yep.
suburbs out there near Jeremy's shop, and
Yep.
it
No,
was. I definitely have seen that. I think now that you mention it.
Yeah, I look at the tires and things like that. And if you get on the gram or any of the social media, and it's like most of those tires, there's a whole group of young gunslingers that are really good. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I mean, that's excellent. That gives their sport legs down the road. Because the unfortunate part is we were talking about those legends. Like, here's the sad part: there are no more famous guys that are going to come out of this sport, and that's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
The way that we perceive information now, like if you look at the guys that like we all looked up to, which the handout would be the Lefty Craze, the Flip Pallets, the Dave Whitlocks, the Gary Borgers, I mean, there's a long list of those guys. Those guys
Mm-hmm.
earned it the hard way a long time ago. They were doing shows, they were writing books, they were doing articles. And nowadays, not to take anything away from it, and I'm not poo pooing it, but like social media and things can amplify people's persona pretty easily, without
Mm-hmm.
necessarily having the backing or the skill sets, let's say.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, like all of our real true living legends are dying and there are no more to replace them. It's
Mm-hmm.
really bums me out. So it's like this is going to be my program as I get older into the sport. Is like I'm going to make sure every one of these young guys knows where all of this came from. Like those guys. We owe such a great debt of gratitude to those famous guys of our industry.
Mm-hmm. 100%, man. I mean, I think you're absolutely right too. And just like you said, it's so easy to create an account, and
Yeah.
as long as you got a good camera and you can, understand lighting relatively well, you can make a shitty fly look pretty darn good, and
That's
like,
right.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And I think it's, you know, you're absolutely right. It's the the sidewalk's been paved for a lot of us right now, right? And
Yeah.
it's going forward now that is a matter of, okay, who who and how and where is the next bit of innovation going to come
Yeah.
from, right?
Who
And
laid
now
those
it's, I mean,
first bricks down for us? And then where does that path take us?
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully continuing in a good direction, man. I
It
mean,
will.
I don't
It
know.
will. I
I
think the
think it will.
sport lends itself to that, hopefully.
Hmm. Definitely, man. I think it's always, as much as we hate to admit it, it's never going to be the conventional game. It's never going to
No,
be as big as the
no,
Bassmaster tournament, but that's
no,
okay.
I hope not.
That's part of that's why we like it, right?
That's
Is
it.
to get out and go on the water and not run into too many people, or get
I
out and
think the
find out.
other thing about the fly industry that's pretty cool is like it's kind of a cool club. It's not this, everybody looks at this sometimes as like this elitist sport of fly fishing, and I don't look at it at all like that. I just look at a lot of really dedicated people that just love it for what it is. But I
Hmm.
think of the people that I've gotten to meet through the sport and the people that I just run into from happenstance of being in the industry. Like it's such a tiny, close knit family. I mean, it's
Hmm.
bizarrely small. And that's what's so cool about it. Like we all know everybody in the industry. Once you're in it,
Yeah.
like you know everybody in the industry. It's just part of a big happy family.
Hmm. Definitely. And I mean, I think that's it's one of the reasons I'm very glad to be a part of the Midwestern family, at the very least, at least compared
Yeah,
to, some of the, you go out west and that slice of the pie is pretty damn thin for
it
everyone. You know
is.
what I mean? Whereas, the
Yeah.
Midwest, everyone's kind of got their space, and
They do,
I
and,
don't know,
and
maybe
most of
it's
the
the
guides keep their
Midwest
keep.
niceness.
Yeah, it is Midwest nice, and most of the guides keep in their lane and are pretty
Hmm.
cool. And I think about some of my best friends in the industry are some of my competitors, like Kyle Zempel that runs Black Earth Angling on the Wisconsin. Like he's one of my best friends. Like we're
Hmm.
competitors. We share customers. Like there's not a lot of places in the country that like you just kind of hang out with all the guys that are other outfitters. But
Yeah,
here we do.
right.
You know,
Didn't you marry Kyle and his wife
I
on a
did.
sandbar in
Yeah,
Wisconsin?
yeah. Yeah, I got to, it was a
That's
pretty
so
epic
sick.
day. He called me up. He's like, "We're gonna elope, dude. Will you do the service for me?" And like, I was ordained online, like a bunch of other people have been, and it was just awesome. Yeah, it was spectacular. It's very
That's so
Kyle and
sick,
Hannah
man.
like. It was an awesome, awesome day.
That's so
But
rad.
good people in our industry, Pierce.
Hmm. Absolutely, man. On the note of the lower Wisconsin, you and I talked about this when we were in the shop that one time, but man, the so smallmouth live in a wide variety of habitats, right?
Yeah.
The Northwoods rivers are very different than the sandy, ever-changing lower Wisconsin Riverway, or even like the weird, funky, driftless, warm
Yeah.
water streams and stuff like that that somehow hold smallmouth and stuff like that. For folks who are they're listening to this right now and they're like, you know what, this has me fired up. I want to go out and I want to fish for smallies,
Mm-hmm.
right? What advice do you have for them in terms of figuring out their fishery? And if you were to give them a list of, actually, I'm gonna save you from the list here. What advice would you give them in terms of figuring out their fishery? And totally just had a brain fart, but it was something
It's okay.
food related. Figuring out like their fly selection, I guess, in
Sure.
terms of like
Sure.
what food's available for those fish in the water.
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing that you just have to look at is like if it is a sand and wood based river, or it's primarily sand and wood, I can
Hmm.
almost assure you that like for those people going out, it's going to be a bait fish game. You know, like crayfish has to travel a long way to find stones and rocks, so um, it's going to be that kind of game. Sand and wood, you're going to cover a lot more water without finding any fish. It's like the lower Wisconsin. Like I would be lost on that river, absolutely lost on that river because of what it is. You know, you run into pockets of fish. If it's a rock river where it's primarily rock with reasonable visibility, you're going to have great distribution of smallmouth more equally laid out. You know, it was like
Hmm.
you can concentrate on a lot of that watershed. But again, if it's sand and wood, like you're going to have to just keep moving and cover water. You know, cover water until all of a sudden you come up with a pattern. For those of you who are just getting into it, I mean, that's basically it. Cover water till you come up with a pattern that seems to be like a systematic method getting after it. But if it's all rock and even moving and clear, like you can concentrate on anything likely, and there's going to be fish there.
Got it.
Easier,
I love
way
it, man.
easier to
That
fish.
was,
Way easier to
dude. That was a
fish.
that was an excellent answer. I was expecting a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but no, that you hit
It
it right
could
on the
be
head,
because
man.
it's
That's
like,
perfect.
you
Could be, but
know,
why make it? You know what I mean? Especially for folks
but,
who are trying to figure it
well,
out. I think like
I've
you like
done,
like
yeah, and I've done podcasts with. There's another group of guys that do a podcast, SVS, that I've done some podcasts with those guys. Super nice group of guys, but they have rock bottom and stuff too. But they don't have clarity. You know, they don't have the same
hmm
clarity. It's really a dark water. So like our finesse game, even though they really want it to work good, just doesn't work great there. You know, they don't have the visual. You know, so it's like bigger bait fish, louder poppers work better just because of water clarity and things like that. So you have to take a lot of
sure.
that stuff into account on each fishery, unquestionably.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, that was honestly circling back to your book there. That was one of the things that jumped out to me the most. Was flipping through some of those essays and the interviews and
Yeah.
towards the back of the book there.
Yep. Yep.
And I mean, I learned smallmouth fishing primarily from those guys down in Illinois. And so
Yeah.
when I read
Yep.
Austin Aducci's
Yep.
piece about exactly like you said, dirty water, rocky, but you
Yep.
have to like be aggressive with your fly retrieve. I learned the same thing from Mike Allen with Midwest Waters, and like,
Yep.
dude, I would come up, started fishing the lower Wisconsin, and like even like up with you guys and stuff,
Yeah.
and it's just like slow it down, like just a
Yeah.
little bit,
You're
like you can
popping
still
it too
do it,
much,
but
man.
like just slow it down a little. And I was like, dude, I never would have thought about that, but that was like
Yeah.
that was my big light bulb moment today that got me
Yeah.
fired up. But
Yeah. Aducci was funny because he was like, I talked to him at one show. He's like, God, I hate it when guys fish with you because like they're not moving it at all. I need them to move it. And I'm like, no, you can't move it. Just bend its legs, man. Yeah, we
That's
screw each
crazy that
other
it's
up.
that subtle, man. I love it, dude.
Mm-hmm.
That's I mean that's the fun of it, right? That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. I
That's
mean,
so sick. Well,
I think that the sport would be, I think the sport has grown more fun for more people now that we know that it's not just as simple as take this fly and just go and hit the banks
hmm
and you're going to be successful. It still
totally.
works. The beauty of smallmouth is if you took a Murdich minnow in the front of the boat or in the back of the boat and a popper in the front of the boat and you just bang the banks all day on most watersheds, you're going to be successful enough at this sport to go and do it again. It's going to be good
hmm
enough to go do it again. But if you
Right.
want to unlock like more of the padlocks, and you need to have more of the keys, and that's
Mm-hmm.
where some of the stuff in the book comes in, and that understanding. And that's why we're starting to see more people dive into this, because they're realizing it's not that simple, or it can be a lot more involved than what people think.
Yeah, totally, man. That's so true. I mean, that's the fun of it. That's why
It
any of us
is.
get obsessed with anything. You know what I mean? Is
Oh
like you
yeah.
start to realize,
Yeah.
well, wait a minute, like
Yeah.
there's more to it than, like you said, just slapping the bank and chugging a streamer off the side of it. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can I can fish with a wiggly, or I can
Yeah.
fish with some crazy
Yeah.
freaking Ned fly that I never even had seen before that somehow just mopped fish up that day.
Not
But
now you're Ned flying fish. You thought
dude,
it was
exactly.
dirty. Now you think it's cool.
I didn't think it was dirty. I was more
It,
just
I,
like, how
I
the
thought
hell
it was
do I
dirty. It's
fish
like,
this thing?
but it's like, ooh, it works so good.
Dude, too
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Too good. Right.
I
Right.
love it, man.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Well, dude, we're coming up over an hour here. I want to not take up too much of your evening here, but dude, what's on your agenda for this upcoming spring preseason? Are you chasing turkeys? Are you doing morel
Yeah.
hunting? Going to go
Yeah.
after some
Morel
trout? Get
hunting and
that fixed
turkeys.
before?
Yeah. I mean,
Hell yeah.
first doing a bunch of shed hunting. I got out and did some shed hunting. Found a good dead head. It was one that must have been killed during the archery season. It was kind of a bummer, but
Mm-hmm.
like I recovered the head. Um, Last year, my wife and son found a buck that was dead that scored a 167. So that was a pretty sweet giant
Holy
find.
smokes.
But I've got my best buddy Sam Tion was down at my cabin, and he's got a dog, Gus, that is a shed magnet, and he found 4 or 5 really nice sheds the other day. But yeah, then morel season. Hope we get some water for morel season. Try to kill my turkey. You've informed me that I missed my deadline for my extra tag. Thank you. Excellent. And then I just plan on getting in the boat with a bunch of my boys, Stan and Gavin and Bardo and Nate, and try to catch some early smallmouth and get out there before we start working. That's my
Hell yeah,
spring.
man. I love it, dude. That's a great spring right there. I can't think of a better spring
It's a pretty good
than
spring.
that. That's phenomenal, dude. Well,
It's
man,
pretty solid.
this has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you and getting to learn more about the Tight Lines history, and just I don't know, man. I've been isolated all winter. I haven't gotten to really talk with too many fishy people, and dude, this was just the fix that I needed. But
That's perfect.
before we wrap up, dude, where
Yeah.
can folks go to learn more about Tight Lines, book a trip with one of you or with you or
Yeah.
one of your guides, and follow along with all the awesome stuff you guys are doing up in De Pere?
Absolutely. Well, you can find us, our website. Any of the flies that we talked about are all on there. You can go to www.tightlinesflyshop.com. That's our website. That'll give you like all of the trip information, a bunch of the videos that we did. Check out our YouTube channel. It's got a bunch of that stuff. You can find us on social media at Tight Lines Fly Fishing Company, or Tight Lines Fly Fishing CO on Facebook. And I believe Instagram, it's Tight Lines Fly Fishing Co. WI. So you can find us on all the social platforms. And our guides, myself, are posting throughout that whole time, kind of keeping people up to date on what the season looks like and what the shenanigans at the guide shack looks like. So it's pretty cool.
Hell yeah, man. I love it. Well, dude, I'm excited to hopefully see a picture of a dead turkey in a couple
Right
weeks
on.
here, or at the
I
very
hope so.
some pictures from you and the boys of some
Yeah.
gigantic pre-one smallmouth here, and I'm hoping I can make it up there sometime this spring before
Yeah. Do
things
that,
get
man. It's an
crazy
open
for me.
invitation. You know where we are, Pierce.
Deal, man. I love it. I appreciate the heck out of that. And man, I really appreciate your time tonight and just all the knowledge that you've dropped here, as well as all that you're doing for our little Midwest fly fishing community, brother.
It's my pleasure, Pierce. Thanks for having me on, man. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.